Good afternoon, and thanks to Jim and others for the opportunity to come and to present to you the pork industry's perspective, of course, of risk-based surveillance, but also of surveillance in general, comprehensive, integrated surveillance, and I'm hopeful that it'll come across as an example of an opportunity for industry, state, federal cooperation to the betterment of animal health. So, talking about surveillance, and this is going to go fairly quickly, I believe, in how we look at surveillance, and I don't think that this is going to be any controversial issues in the current surveillance programs for swine health tied to regulatory programs. We've got pseudorabies surveillance. We've got classical swine fever surveillance. There will be a vesicular disease surveillance program. All those surveillance programs, brucellosis and certainly for the others, tuberculosis, and all of those are all regulatory diseases. The issue around building surveillance with regulatory disease programs is that it can be difficult to amend things, to change things, to address priorities, especially industry priorities as we go. And it is also, it has led us to some challenges in defending or advancing funding for the individual programs. One of the questions we get, we've got a pseudorabies surveillance line item, pseudorabies program item that says we need a surveillance program for pseudorabies for eradication. Well, the eradication program's over. Why do we still need surveillance for pseudorabies? Because it's over and now it's a foreign animal disease. We won't have it, and we just need very basic things to look for it. It's a challenge in maintaining funding for all of the surveillance programs because it tends to be an issue of, if it's not on the front burner right now, then it might be a spot where we can save money later. As well, when we do when the surveillance programs are built around different regulatory programs, there can be some redundancies built in that that lead to some inefficiencies in costs and other things. So those are all really governmental issues. They're not really pork industry issues, except how it affects our ability or our wish and need to have surveillance programs within our industry that are effective, that are timely, and that can help us both protect and advance the health of our herds. So one of the things that we took a look at, and thankfully we're hopeful that we're building on this, is the VS 2015, the Vision for Veterinary Services, because there's some very important words in here, and certainly this isn't pork industry language, this is veterinary services language, but again we build on that in that it says capable of finding foreign, emerging program diseases. And really a very important phrase here for 2015, supporting international reporting and trade verification requirements. I'm going to come back to that as we go through, as I talk a little bit more about industry priorities for surveillance, because that's a very important part of the future for our industry. Certainly there's the protective, there's the detection, there's the response, all of those things around foreign animal diseases, of course. We have emerging diseases we have to work with, and when we have now 28–29% of our production going into markets, into foreign markets, the surveillance programs that have the wherewithal of the U.S. government and the USDA to stand up and say, this is the surveillance, we know what's in our country, here's our veterinary authority, and here is our sign-off, is extremely important in the both making those markets available as well as maintaining the markets that we have. So I borrowed this from Dr. John Korsland with USDA and modified it a little bit because I thought it gave a pretty good look at what we try to do with comprehensive surveillance and the way the pork industry is looking at this. But I modified it a little bit to get it from the start to the finish. The comprehensive and integrated swine surveillance, it's a system-wide thing, and I'm going to go through the steps because these are the steps that we're working on to try to get this implemented under the vision of VS 2015. First of all, a collaborative prioritization. As we go through surveillance priorities, that we can't, none of us, whether it's industry, federal or state, can work in just our silos. It's got to be a collaborative process for identifying and prioritizing the diseases that we want to come under surveillance, because everybody's going to have to work together on it. Define the disease surveillance objectives. As you get into the pieces of surveillance and the objectives of detection or the objectives of freedom, of demonstration of freedom, and how those things built in with the time frames that are built in. It's very important that, again, this is a collaborative process and everybody's on the same page in how the programs are going to be built. Plan collection, coordinated testing, appropriate surveillance samples, gets into comprehensive multiple tests for different samples. Collection of surveillance data at risk-based points or surveillance streams. There's multiple streams to go. One of the approaches that we've had since the pseudorabies eradication program, since it began in '89, but really as it was winding up in the late '90s, was this risk-based approach where we're hopeful that what we'll end up with in comprehensive surveillance is a program that will be able to target surveillance such that it can take a close look at those populations that are most at risk and have some sort of a baseline of surveillance activities within other populations, but really more of a baseline of activity that needs to happen across the board, and then focusing down on identifying the risk areas, identifying the risk herds, and all of those risks that go with that, and concentrating surveillance efforts, especially in those risk-based points or surveillance streams. One of the things we learned from H1N1 in 2009, and as that surveillance program was developed and built, was that you never start a surveillance program without an agreed upon response plan. It's easy to say we're going to start surveillance, we're going to start looking for things. That's really probably the easy part of identifying risk, identifying the samples, identifying how to do it, how to collect it. It's a little harder on how to analyze it, how to report it, but that's really the easy part. The part that has to happen before you start any surveillance program is to have a defined response plan. That is an integrate part of the whole package, and something that has to happen in comprehensive and integrated swine surveillance, as illustrated by H1N1, and also I'll point out as well, as illustrated by some other priorities that we may have down the road. IT infrastructure, analysis of the surveillance and needs, so it's going back, and adequate funding. One of the things that can be a real challenge in the current system is the IT infrastructure, the ability for different computers in different places to talk to each other and coordinate information. Our benefit for national surveillance comes when everybody's on the same page. We can find, we can respond to things that are emerging or things that we find as quickly as possible, and that means we have to have an IT infrastructure that is effective, come under that quick, that can give us information so it can be analyzed and it can be acted on very quickly. So it's all of those things and not this collection of different program diseases. Nationally, okay, but one of the things that we're working on with the pork board is the philosophy of beginning surveillance locally rather than just nationally as well. The Sentinel Veterinary Clinic program that we've got into place brings together veterinary clinics from across regions of the country on regular telephone calls, and it's essentially simply an update. What are you seeing? What are the concerns? They're on the telephone with each other. They're talking to each other. They're talking to us. They're talking to diagnostic labs. What are we seeing out there on the field? And that's where the rubber's going to meet the road as far as where surveillance has to start, is out in the field for that type of early warning system that our veterinarians and our producers can provide us. So that early warning system provides that local intelligence. There's other areas that we can take advantage of. We aren't taking full advantage of them yet, but within the comprehensive system, it won't just be testing in the diagnostic labs and looking for things. The Sentinel Veterinary Clinics, FSIS condemnation data, an example, a few years ago, increased condemnations for erysipeloid-like lesions in packing plants started to increase, and subsequent to that, a few months later, we started to get penicillin residues that we hadn't seen before. Had we been on the alert for this type of thing, we could have looked at that condemnation data and done some education, done some outreach, see what's going on, make sure people are aware, so we continue to do that food safety outreach that's even based on animal health surveillance. Diagnostic lab submissions focuses on clinical disease. Another thing that we're working on with checkoff money is validation of the oral fluid tests for populations of pigs for different diseases rather than drawing blood from individual pigs for serum tests. Back in the day, everybody that was involved in that pseudorabies eradication program generally have a problem with hearing in one ear or the other because they were kneeling down in front of those pigs pulling blood. And one of the outcomes of not only the PERS initiative, but of other initiatives with checkoff money, as well as with other cooperative money, has been the development of this oral fluid test that's based on pigs' curiosity, hanging ropes in pens, and the pigs are curious. They'll come along and they'll just chew on those things, and we can validate the type of diagnostic test looking for antibodies and for maybe some antigens as well. Validate those tests so those can be used as population monitors rather than having to go to individual animals and get individual samples. Those types of innovative things that are coming on are going to support surveillance down the road, not just for detection, but I expect that when we get something we really don't want, those types of tests are going to help us very much with the final part of surveillance post outbreak is again the proof of negative once we've eradicated whatever we're after and we want to go back to that negative status. So there's a lot of things. These are just some of them. But there's a lot of things. That's what I'm talking about with the appropriate streams. A number of different streams that can go into this surveillance program, and it's all based on the appropriate streams for the agent. In priorities, as we develop our surveillance priorities for the industry, hearkening back to that collaborative philosophy, what we've done is put together a surveillance working group that is made up of producers, of veterinarians, of subject matter experts. USDA, NSU's been part of it. The swine health programs, people have been part of it. We want to get a good consensus on swine disease surveillance. Convene this group. They have been convened. We haven't done it for a couple of years, but they have been convened, and they've done a comprehensive look at they ranked 27 diseases of pigs in priority for the industry, including in concert with USDA as well. The bottom here is kind of the circle. I wonder if I can do this. Nope. Oh, there it is. The bottom is kind of the circle of how this thing is supposed to work. Our surveillance working group provides this look at industry priorities for surveillance needs to NSU, to USDA, and they come back to this working group, to the industry, with design options. There are multiples of iterations that happen here because of those design options. The freedom of disease, the early detection, how fast do we want, should we have detection, what's the prevalence, all of those things that go on within that really mean, what it means with the design options, it means different budgeting considerations. And coming back and working with the industry on those budgeting considerations gives us the ability, us as the industry, not us as Pork Board, but us as the industry, NPPC and AASV, to help to ensure funding for the type of surveillance that we need to have. Once NSU has that surveillance design, risk-based, appropriate streams, all of that approach hopefully provides us with surveillance data, the analysis and reporting. Again, it goes to response. We aren't going to have a surveillance program without some response, and that response very well may be to do nothing. An appropriate response may be just to monitor. But the important thing is to have an agreed upon response for the surveillance plan to begin with. All of that circles back into the working group for updating priorities. That was the analysis and update part, and it keeps going. Eventually, should this thing come to fruition in full force, this could be done yearly and modified yearly depending on the priorities, depending on the situation per year. That's our hope, but the objective here, whether it's yearly or not, the objective is to do this in a timely enough manner to have a response quick enough that surveillance can be flexible enough to address industry needs. That's where you get back to the language of VS 2015, talking about regulatory programs, yes, but also talking about helping the industry with other things, emerging disease with foreign market access, foreign market maintenance, those types of things. In order to do that, this has got to be flexible, it's got to be timely, and it's got to be responsive. So that working group came up with this list. And so it's really fairly simple in that the top priorities are regulatory issues. They are national regulatory issues, of course. FMD, the thing that scares you, the thing that scares me about this, and that's the way it's got to be because there's got to be parameters to it. But 95% confidence, a detection of one case in 1 million within 2 weeks of when that first case happens. So that is the definition for surveillance that we had at that time. And I don't know, maybe Aaron can tell us if that's been updated. But there's this time parameter in here, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 4 weeks. We can't find it as soon as it happens. I guess you could, but you'd have to have unlimited resources to do it. And so with limited resources, there's got to be these parameters put into place. FMD, pseudorabies, CSF, and brucellosis. Top 4 regulatory disease issues. But then you get to also, in these 7, influenza viruses, trichina, toxoplasma. Those are industry priorities that are not regulatory disease. And that's where our regulatory programs, and that's where the rub comes. Again, going back to the H1N1 example in 2009 and how that worked. A non-regulatory disease for which there was a lot of effort and a lot of motivation to have a surveillance, a government surveillance program, but a non-regulatory disease. Therefore, no authority by which to do the surveillance as there is in FMD, pseudorabies, classical swine fever, and brucellosis. That's where for these others, it has to be a partnership. We have to have a partnership as we work with USDA and the states on 5, 6, and 7. That plays back into the communication and the partnership that has to be in place for 1 through 4 as well. So, the thing that really excites me is that in 2012, we have the opportunity to do the first test of a comprehensive swine disease surveillance. We talk about organizing, of integrating, of coordinating. We've talked about that for about 12 years now, since the Swine Futures Project report came out in 2000, 2001. We've talked about how to get to this spot. We're here in 2012. And while it isn't maybe readable in back, I'm going to point out the pieces of this, because this is where the comprehensive integrated swine disease surveillance is really going to be tested out with integrating all of those industry, federal, and state components. So you start at the top, and this is the key for this thing. We're going to start with pseudorabies, just to test this out with something that is really a low-hanging fruit with the pseudorabies program. Breeding swine with standard premises identification tags or state premises identification tags come into packing plants. So the sow tags that we've been working on in the industry, this is a voluntary program, is for producers putting Prem ID sow tags into the gilts or into the sows prior to market, so we can replace the back tags that if they stay on and if they go through a lot of ifs, they can be effective, but have proven to be very problematic in all of the diseases as far as identification. The objective here, hopefully at some point, we're going to have a majority of sows coming in plants that have permanent identification on them in the form of a sow ID tag. Those come into the packing plants. The tags and the blood will be collected at the packing plant as it is now. Back tags as well if they come in, but these pin tags, either state identifiers or national premises identifiers, will be collected with the blood. The federal lab will prepare the samples, and when this thing happens, the federal lab will prepare the samples, hold the samples for testing until the lab reports the IDs to the National Surveillance Unit, the NSU. NSU does their magic with risk-based prioritization, both through Wildlife Services as well as the Prem ID tags that give premises identification at the state level. So the state repository identifiers play a role in here. The national repository identifiers play a role in here. That's part of the IT loop that has to happen. We have to have that fully integrated into it and provide the information in a timely manner. Once NSU can do that loop where it can ping the states, ping the national databases, provide the state, part of the benefit for the state for this is going to be to provide the state with an update of premises that are actively marketing pigs. So as we get into an emergency response type of situation, the state will have the ability to know which premises in their state are active and which premises are marketing, so they can go right to them. As NSU does that prioritization, they're going to report back to the federal lab. The federal lab takes those samples that are prioritized and works through the testing to report back to NSU the positive, the negative. NSU has that data for their database, and they can use that for their analysis and support, again, for the industry, for markets. It's a loop that has to happen. It has to happen with industry cooperation. It has to happen with federal cooperation through the National Surveillance Unit and the development of IT capability. It has to happen from the states with the access to their state database for premises identification if it's a prem ID from the state rather than through the national repository, and that comes back to benefit the state, to benefit the industry, and to enable the NSU, USDA to do analysis, do reporting, and to help support our markets. This is all going to be tested out this summer. It's going to be an exciting project. It's an exciting program, and hopefully our objective is going to be to report on the success of this at USAHA this fall. Yeah. See, eventually what's going to happen, eventually what we're working for is that there will be so many sows coming into packing plants with tags in their ears. And again, this is a voluntary deal, but it's gaining momentum and it's working. There'll be so many sows that are coming into packing plants with these tags in their ears that we no longer will have to test everything that comes in with an identification. The NSU is going to be able to prioritize, USDA is going to be able to pick and choose which one of those samples they want to test based on that risk-based information. That's the idea. So no longer, and if we can do that, if we can focus in on that risk-based testing, we've got the opportunity, the probability to save money, to help address further industry needs by efficiencies in the surveillance programs and going to the trichina and toxo and other things that we need to have as we go down the road. Industry support for this whole thing? The answer to that is yes. Both the National Pork Board and the National Pork Producers Council have had resolutions at their national meetings that support comprehensive surveillance, support the disease surveillance system that addresses animal and public health needs, integrating SIV and public health needs as well within the system. As well, the AVMA, with the help of the swine veterinarians, AASV, during 2010 at the House of Delegates meeting, resolved that the AVMA supports the development of comprehensive and integrated swine disease surveillance of the U.S. swine herd. We've got industry support. We've got state support because the states want this information to help update their database. We've got federal support because VS 2015 and the vision for USDA being responsive to industry needs. Now all we got to do is put it all together. That's all we got to do. Adequate funding. Adequate funding is that's something where the Pork Board, although we can do analysis, we can't do any lobbying. So that's our sister organization, NPPC, and our other sister organization, AASV, come into play. So adequate funding started. We started the project, really started the concept to try to put it in, to try to implement it out of the supplemental funding that USDA got through HHS in response to swine influenza and the 2009 H1N1. Of course, that's USDA money, but as this thing came in, and as, again, this is a non-program disease, so that was, as I said, motivation to work together in trying to figure out how to address surveillance with the resources that were available. And we got a good start there, making lemonade out of the lemons we were handed with the H1N1 outbreak in 2009. Funding challenges continue in FY 2013 because of the pullback of government programs and the APHIS proposal to decrease swine health programs from $23 million in 2012 to $20.3 in 2013, which is an 11% decrease, and modifies swine surveillance efforts by a decrease of about $2.5 million. That affects it. One of the things that that we're working on is trying to figure out how to either work with or address this. And the language that APHIS has used in their justification for this, in that it seems to be that they're taking some credit for a comprehensive integrated swine surveillance that has not yet been fully implemented. But that, whether that's the case, whether it's here or there, we've got to work with what we've got. We're going to work to try to, we, the industry again, not the pork board, but we, the industry, are going to work very hard to try to identify funds, to try to identify areas that can support USDA in the effort and continue. Even in the face of this, the support that we've got from USDA, from states, and from industry, I think, as I said, 2012 now, and the pilot project is going to be a very important and very exciting project. Last one here is the comprehensive stakeholders, and the list is simply long. As I said, federal, state, industry cooperation in this. Anytime you've got these many organizations that all come into play and all have to work together, it's quite an organizational challenge, quite a coordinated challenge, but we've got real good leadership in USDA. We have good leadership in the states. They want to have things happen, and we as an industry are thankful that we have this opportunity.